First of all, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing phones.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got nothing.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
Chinese critic.
erratic
Mikhail
detective,
Rodriguez.
Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
You apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hi there, you're watching the Freddie Kissoon Show with co-host Leonard. We're coming to you from Century Palm Gardens under the banner of a Guyanese icon, Christopher Kit Nascimento. We're in his lovely backyard where the trees and the flowers are overwhelming. Welcome to the program, welcome to Leonard Craig, and welcome to the Guyanese icon, Christopher Kit Nascimento. This is about the 5th time Mr. Nascimento has graced our cameras, and we hope, given the mountainous, voluminous, prodigious knowledge he has of Guyana as he stands at 93 years plus, we hope to have him many more times. You do not often get someone whose wit and breadth of the contents of British Guyana and Guyana are so wide. As you can see, Kit is a very different person. We conducted this interview without any long trousers. He said he prefers that, but his legs are not that bad, and I'm sure wouldn't show that bad on the camera. Kit, it's nice to be here. I think
Freddie, thank you very much.
this is the first time you'll be seeing the man of the moment in the Chronicle. Then I'll try.
No, not the first day.
This is the man David Hines put the John B. Lash on. David Hines said he's a lick bottom betrayer of African
Freddie,
people.
I'm at home. I must wear my short pants, feel comfortable. I'm at home.
Yeah, you must feel comfortable. I don't have any problem with that. Good. So Kit, seeing that you have not been interfacing with Leonard Craig over the years, I will leave Craig to do the first question.
Yeah, surely. One of the main reasons we want to interview at this time is because our Republican anniversary is coming up in a few days, or by the time this is aired, we would have had our Republican anniversary. We would like you to take us through, because I think at that time you were involved in the Burnham administration, at least doing some PR work and things like that.
Well, I was in the cabinet.
Oh, you were in the cabinet. Okay, just take us through what was happening behind the scenes. Who were the people being called back in London? What was happening? Just give us some insight into what was happening to bring us to first independence, then republic.
Well, as you know, prior to us becoming independent, there were 3 discussions with the British government involving the PPP, the PNC, and the United Force. As the PNC and the United Force had formed a coalition. There were 3 meetings in London with regard to the country becoming independent. They were not particularly friendly meetings. Peter de Gaulle, who led the United Force and who is my uncle, I was at that time involved in the United Force. But remember then, at that time, I was not in the government at all. I was completely outside of the government at the point of our becoming independent. The United Force leader, Peter de Gaulle, was not particularly keen on independence at the time. Forbes, Burnham, and Chetty Jagan were of course, fully in support of independence. But there was a significant disagreement on the method of voting. At the time we were become independent, we had a constituency system, a first past the post. That was strongly opposed by Burnham and de Gaulle, who wanted to change it to a PR system. The reason for that was that the PPP were winning elections with a minority vote. As the population was more concentrated in the city than in the countryside. Eventually, the British government agreed, under protest from the People's Progressive Party, to change the system to PR. So that the first election that took place after independence was under the PR system, not first past the post, which gave the majority of the vote to become combined PNC and United Force. So that is the major political decision that was made. It was very strongly protested by the PPP coming into independence.
You said there were 3 discussions going on.
Yes.
That were not so friendly,
and
they were
different stages.
At different, right? But those discussions were happening in London.
In London.
What's the nature of that? Apart from
the issue was independence. Under what conditions the country would become independent? Yes.
Okay.
And the main issue was
the electoral system.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Now, the push to independence, and independence was granted, the idea that independence is coming up in a few months, weeks, whatever, leading into independence. What was the atmosphere in Guyana like? How people were receiving it?
I think the majority of the people were in favor of independence. So as I said, the United Force was not in favor of it.
Do you see a class preference? Why de Gaulle and the United Force, who were mainly the mulatto type class of people, do you think they preferred white rule rather than do you see a class?
No, I don't think ethnicity or race had anything to do with it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. I think Peter de Gaulle simply felt that the country was not economically ready to be independent.
Okay.
It had nothing to do with the birth to be ruled by white people.
So then we end up having
The majority of the United Force boat came from the Indian community, the Indian and the Amerindian community. The Portuguese boat didn't matter; it was so small.
Oh, okay. And based on some of the discussions I hear about the history of Guyana, even though the GAR ran a sizable amount of the Portuguese vote also went to the PNC. That's how I
is that true?
understanding.
No, I
It's
don't.
the first time I'm hearing that.
I don't.
Why were the Portuguese voting for the PNC and they have a Portuguese oriented party?
That's not accurate.
That's not accurate, no.
Fair to say that the Portuguese vote, it didn't matter. It was 1% or 2% anyway.
Oh, okay.
I think Craig heard that wrongly. I want to change the subject completely, then I'll go back to Craig. We're in an area called Century Palm Gardens. You know, Kit, I went to Montrose. The Montrose was developed into a housing area by Hand in Hand Insurance. And I went to Montrose last year when they redid the streets. And one street named Exoria Street after the Exoria plant, another street named Bougainvillea, and all the streets are like that. There's no street in Montrose that has the name of a person. And this thing bothers me in decades ago because I was trained first as a historian, and it continues to bother me. Why do we have North Road and South Road? Mr. Hoyt contributed significantly to Ghana's politics. He lived in North Road even when he was president. Why do we have Century Palm Garden? Why can't we name it after somebody? Why can't we name these streets after people? The CARICOM heads a mission around this time is taking place at a building named after a former Barbadian prime minister. And I think this thing about name changing to reflect our history is something that really irks me. Now, Leonard and I did an interview with somebody you would know. He's about your age, he's 1 year older than you, John. And John told us that within Queenstown, in a radius of 2 blocks, 4 West Indian style batsmen lived within the 2-block radius. And only one of the street is named after, none of the street is named after those four persons. You know, that would be Clive Lloyd, Roger Harper, a guy called Christiani, and
Gibbs. One of the streets
no,
are
not
actually
Gibbs.
named after
Gibbs.
Yeah,
but that's not the 4 batsmen. The 4 batsmen was Roger Harper, Clive Lloyd, he called another one, and Christiani. And none of those streets in Queenstown, why can't we name this street with where you're living in?
No, I think
Nascimento Road. I mean, how long you lived there? How long you lived there?
in here for about almost 30 years.
30 years. What is Century Palm Gardens about? Why not Kit Nascimento Gardens?
I'll tell you why it's named Century Palm Gardens, because all of the palm trees there were century palm.
Oh.
But ironically, there isn't one of them left.
Oh.
That's the reason.
Oh,
This area actually was originally occupied by officers of the Guyana Defense Force. Originally, most of the properties there it was set up by Burnham to house the GDF officers.
And they moved out.
Over years,
You have a couple of...
They've all gone. There's not one of them in the area anymore.
But you don't you think we should name some of these streets after?
I like the idea of not after me, but I like.
But I know you wouldn't say that, so people like me and Craig to say that. But before we come back to Craig,
Well, you usually name it after a person after they die.
well, I don't believe in that. I think
I
we should
believe-
offer praise
yeah,
to people who are
when they
living.
are
No, I agree
should
with
offer
you. I
praise to
agree with
people who
you.
are
I mean, I would be very flattered if there was a street named after me. But I agree
How
with
many
you,
more
Freddie.
do you have like you and John? Well, not so much John. I mean, John worked at Kaisuku, then CARICOM, and that's it. You worked all over the place. Anyway, before we go back to Craig, the memoir is about to be published?
No, Freddie, not about.
Still working on it.
I'm still working on it.
And
As I told you the last time you asked me this question, is that I'm still a working man. I'm doing a job. I run a public relations company. I advise a number of clients, including, in fact, the president. So
what they got to do with the memoir?
it keeps me very busy.
Okay, okay. Well, we're talking about this year, right?
I have a draft of it. It's not done.
Oh, you have a draft of it.
Yes.
Could I be the first person in Guyana to see that draft?
No.
Pointed.
Yeah. But you're a man that don't hide your words, right? Never did, right? So I'm going to ask you something.
I'm not going to show it to any individual before it's published.
So it's in the house there.
Except, Freddie, I have the first draft.
Okay,
It's somewhere, Freddie.
but you didn't remember the last interview we had. You were still playing with the name.
You mean what to call it?
Yeah.
I haven't decided on that.
You haven't decided that.
No. In fact, you gave me an idea. I can't remember what
I can't
it was.
remember what I gave you. I can't remember that.
We just got to roll the tape again.
We just got to roll the tape again. So it's back to Craig.
Yeah. So we are just going through the paces now. We moved from independence to republic.
It is interesting, where I'm concerned, that when we became independent, I was in Boston, at Boston University, doing a degree in public communications. And I was working with an American newspaper in Boston.
You remember the name? Boston Globe?
No, it wasn't a Globe. It was the Patriot Ledger.
The Patriot Ledger.
And they assigned me back to Guyana as an American journalist to cover independence. So I was at Independence when I watched the Union Jack come down and our flag go up, and Chetty and Burnham embraced each other at that time. I will never forget that. And then Chetty held a press conference, and I turned up at the press conference, and Chetty's looking at me with astonishment, and I'm representing an American newspaper at the time. So it was very interesting for me.
That's in the memoir, of course.
That will be, yes, in the memoir, that experience. Because Chetty was not very happy seeing me at the press conference at the time.
Why is that?
Well, I was very much opposed at that time to independence under Jagan because of his connection with communism.
Oh, okay. And you were very vocal about it. So
I was. As a matter of fact, it's historical that I was expelled from one of Chetty's press conferences.
Not that very press conference.
No.
One
Before
prior.
that.
Oh, okay.
Before that.
I've read about that so many times. If your memory could serve you, what shape did that expulsion take? Did he say, Mr. Nascimento, could you please leave the room? Or did the security come and say,
I can describe it exactly for you. I asked him a question that he didn't have an answer to. And he was very upset. I would, if I can take a few minutes on this, I would attend Chetty's press conferences early. It was at a long table. These were radio press conferences. He would sit at one end. I would make the point of sitting at the opposite end, across from him. And I had a file, and I would, when Chetty said something, I would flip the pages and smile. And that would upset him, because he thought, he's going to get a hostile question. And at the time, he had made a speech, a bottom house speech, which did not have publicity with regard to the possibility of the government taking over the media. So it was a controversial issue. And I asked him a question on that. And he denied it. And I said to him, Mr. President, Prime Minister, would you be surprised if I had a recording of it? And at that point, he lost his temper, got up, stood up and said, this is my press conference, it's not Nascimento's press conference. Get out, please leave. Of course, I got up and left.
That's the in the memoir. That's in the memoir.
Yes.
No, that's in the memoir.
Yes. Needless to say, all of that was broadcast and was not edited.
Oh, okay. I see. So just to complete the question I was asking, after independence, we had independence, but the Queen was still our head of state.
Yes, we had not yet become a republic.
Right. So
And Arthur Chung was the president.
Was the president who
Titular
stood
president.
in the place
of the
Queen.
Correct.
And
There's
that is why
similar arrangements throughout the Commonwealth.
right. And for younger people, the prime minister was the elected
Head of
government, right?
Not head
of
state,
state, but head of government.
Correct.
And the head of state then was not elected, but
Didn't have-
appointed by the Queen.
The president was appointed by the Queen on the recommendation of the Prime
Right.
Minister. And
Right.
Arthur Chung was our president.
And I think, right, that still happens in Jamaica. I think Jamaica has, they don't call him president though, they call him
It happens
Governor General.
Governor General.
in
Yeah.
Governor General.
Yeah.
They Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and all
Yeah,
these
Governor
countries
General.
Yeah.
have that arrangement still.
But independence meant that we had to shed all of that.
No, we were fully independent.
No, not independence, sorry. Republican status meant we had to shed all of that.
Well, indeed,
And-
yes. When you become a republic, you are totally divorce yourself from any external administrative or controlling presence.
Where were you at that time?
In Guyana.
You were in Guyana.
Very much in Guyana.
What did we have the
by that-
first march at that time?
By that time, I'd come home, and I was not sure if I was yet in the cabinet, but I think I was advisor to the Minister of Information at that point in time.
Who was the minister? Martin Carter?
No, it was first December,
Yeah, for December.
and then Martin, but I can't remember at what dates that changed. I'm not very good at remembering dates, which is part of my problem with writing my memoirs.
There was somebody, I guess, will have to research the dates.
Well, that's what's happening.
Yeah. So, what would you say was the overwhelming feeling of the man in the street? What was their opinion? Did people like the idea?
About becoming a republic?
Yeah.
I think so. There was certainly no opposition to it. All of the political parties, including even the United Force at that time, supported it. So once all of the political parties are opposing it, you get the general population supporting it.
All right. So take us through this transition that before Republican status was declared, the Queen appointed the president.
On the recommendation.
On the recommendation. Yeah. That is clear. How did the transition happen now? The head of state, I think, still remain until 1980, right?
No, once you became a republic,
Mhm.
The head of government become the head of state.
The president is then the leader of the political party in office, and he's an executive president. The president before was a titular president. He had very few powers, actual political powers.
So you're saying Burnham became president in 1970?
He was prime minister, and he simply became president.
At that was the transition?
Yes.
Immediately in 1970. Okay. And what was the...
And at that time, I was in the cabinet.
At that time you were?
Yes.
Okay, so what was the prevailing, after the transition took place, what was the prevailing political culture? How we know it got heated and all of that. Take us through some of that.
We went through some very difficult times. The competition for political power was always there. In the first election we held, the combination of the United Force and the PNC won it. So Jagan was then out of power. PPP were out of power. We know that both political parties were founded on a power base which was racist. Up to this day, that still haunts us. So I think we're getting away from that eventually, because no single party today has a majority ethnic vote attached to it, whereas in those days it certainly was the case. And we had some periods of very violent confrontations in this country, very ugly and very violent, that we went through.
Let me ask you,
and they were all racially based.
Let me ask you about something in 1968. I don't know if this will be in your memoir, but do you think you have, after then you started to work with the People's National Congress government, you became a cabinet minister. Do you think that Mr. Burnham and maybe a few around him believed at the time in 1968 that the United Force had something to do with the Rupununi uprising?
Yes, he did believe that. And in fact, there was some evidence that Kathleen Degar, his wife, who had been in the Rupununi just prior to that uprising, there was some suggestion and evidence that she might have been connected with it. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with Burnham on that matter. And Burnham decided that he would not make an issue of that.
But I think Peter Degar wasn't arrested for some other thing.
No, not for that.
Not for that, but for some other issue, because there was a photograph of him in handcuff, I think. But Burnham never touched Kathleen Degar.
No. He decided there was no purpose in doing that, and I also, of course, discouraged him from doing that.
Oh, you did?
You see, at that point in time, I became a sort of interlocutor
between the United
between
Forces.
Peter and Forbes. It was a very difficult task because Peter was my uncle. And yet Burnham was my president.
I don't know if this is in your memoir, but these tapes will go down in history. When you passed on, we'll have these tapes when documentaries are done on your books are written on you. Did any time Mr. Degar got really annoyed with you? I could see his anger about the direction your politics went vis-a-vis Forbes Burnham and his government?
Yes. Not so much Peter, but the family, mainly Kathleen, had me cut out of the family will.
That's your aunt, right?
Yes, Peter's wife.
And she succeeded in...
She did.
So you never got a cent from the guy's
Not 1 cent.
dynasty?
No.
But did he ever try? He was more persuasive than her. Would you say that in saying, Christopher, where are you doing? What are you going?
There are a lot of things that happen in politics that people don't know have to do with the characters and relationships of the people involved. They never see it. Kathleen Degar had a significant hold on Peter Degar and influenced him. And she detested Burnham. She was very much a racist, whereas Peter was not. And Peter would agree to something at a meeting with Burnham, go home the next day, he'd come back and disagree under her intervention and influence.
Kit, I've read so many times. I was reading the book.
And I witnessed all that.
Okay, in that context, there is a large opinion out there, and it's contained in a book. The latest book on that would be Oral History of the PPP by Frank Burble Singh, in which Lloyd Best said in that book that Mrs. Jagan exerted undue influence on Chetty Jagan.
I think that's true.
So
I wouldn't describe it as undue, because that's putting an opinion on it. The fact is that she had significant influence on Chetty. She was the organizer, the planner, the administrator of the People's Progressive Party.
So we can say from 64 to 68, some of the policies of Peter Degar as finance minister may have been influenced by his wife. And in the case of the PPPs...
Not so much his policies, but his behavior. His relationships with Burnham were definitely influenced by his wife, yes.
Would you say before Quay come in that if she had a way, she would have advised them against coalition in 64?
No. No, she would have had no influence with regard to that.
Okay. So we have now an independent Republican Guyana. And soon after that, you spoke of the disturbances politically and otherwise. Soon,
before and after.
Right, but I think the more intense part was after, right?
Not really.
Well, the 60s probably, well, you're right. The 60s probably was more intense than after this 1970. But we were moving towards having a constitution. And as you mentioned, the discussion with England was about our electoral system.
Once we became a republic, the British government no longer had any political influence whatsoever.
Yeah, but what I mean is that discussion and that disagreement continued.
It did
until the 1980 Constitution.
Yes.
But how just for the consuming public, just tell us how we ended up with this 1980 Constitution. What were some of the give and takes happening?
Well, it
in
was
the-
largely written in on the directions and influence of Burnham.
Mhm.
Remember, Burnham was then the executive president,
Mhm.
giving him, in effect, absolute political power with a majority vote in Parliament. And the Constitution was written in a way that Burnham wanted it written. Yes, there was participation by the PPP and the United Force, but the coalition broke up shortly after the first year. By the time we came to a second election, the coalition had broken up. The guy had gone. It's worth bearing in mind and mentioning, though, that the United Force, of all of the third parties we've had, was the only one that had a significant vote, 16% of the vote at the first election. Whereas most of the third parties we've had, the AFC, etc., have not had a vote even close to that. So the United Force did have a significant vote that put the PNC UF into office. It wasn't just an attachment to a major party.
When the dispute was going on, by around 6 to 7, between the coalition partners, were you involved? Were you telling your uncle Digar, the other members of the U.S. executive, look,
Yes.
stay the course, what are you doing, why are you calling?
I was very much involved.
And
But I was involved by trying to explain Burnham to Peter and Peter to Burnham.
and what was the reaction on both? Who was more accommodating? Burnham, of course.
Burnham was, because he was in charge. He had the ultimate. Remember, Peter was Minister of Finance. So he was, in all intents and purposes, had a significant role to play.
And I figure Burnham knew he needed Peter's party support to keep him.
Well, yes, of course, he did. Without the UF vote, PNC would not have been in office.
Certainly. So, what do you think is the overriding factor that led to this breakup between the UF and the PNC? What would be one of the things that jump out at you?
Ideological.
Oh.
The PNC in Burnham was essentially a socialist. Burnham, Peter Degar, was a right-wing conservative. There was no natural ideological meeting of the minds. So Burnham, of course, wanted to move the country in a socialist direction. Cooperative socialism was the ultimate result of that. And they simply couldn't agree.
On the socialist agenda, how different, in your opinion, was Chetty from Burnham? Do you think they were...
The big difference was not methodology, it was alignments. Chetty was, and I will maintain this to the time I die, he was a dyed-in-the-wool communist. He was a Marxist-Leninist. That was his ideological beliefs. And the natural affinity was as Freddie just mentioned the Soviet Union, Moscow. How could that was, whereas Burnham was always a nationalist. Burnham was never attached to any external interest, such as the Soviet Union. That was a huge difference. And Burnham understood too that at the end of the day, you're living in the backyard of the United States of America, and that you had to deal with the Americans. The Americans, of course, had a choice, Chetty or Burnham. The choice was obvious.
So would you say now, after the coalition broke up, Burnham faced an election on his own?
He had to rig the elections. He could not win on his own.
He could not win on his own.
And he did rig the elections.
Were you part of the government after the election was rigged?
I was part of a rigged government which was rigged, yes.
Okay.
But I did not and refused to participate in any of the process of rigging. And in the constituency that I was assigned to manage, which was Region 7, there was no rigging because I wouldn't allow it.
You were there when the election was going on in Region 7.
You're saying he was a supervisor of...
I ran the election in that
You ran the election in Region 7.
Yeah. And I told Burnham, plain and straight, I'm not going to tolerate any of the process of rigging the election in this area. And he said, fine.
So, do you feel that you are in a morally compromising position?
That's arguable.
Okay, so you accept?
It's arguable. But the reason that I remained with the government that I knew was rigging the election is the alternative was a communist government and Guyana becoming another Cuba. That was my perception. That was my thinking.
And that was sufficient political reason at the time. You think it was sufficient political reasons for...
In my mind, as it was indeed in the minds of the United States and Great Britain.
All right.
They knew we were rigging the election.
So I got to ask you a very hard question now.
Go ahead.
But I'm asking you because I believe you...
He just wanted to say something. If I want, when he said I want to ask you a hard question, you said, go ahead. If I'm, and you stopped. He interrupted you. If I'm...
I was going to say that the consequence of sitting in this chair is to answer hard questions.
Okay. So this is my question to you. You are justifying and you have conceded that elections were rigged in the 70s.
There was one free election, and that was the first one.
That was the first
64.
one.
After that, all of the elections won by Burnham and subsequently were rigged.
Were rigged. All right, good.
In one form or another.
Right. And at least the earlier forms of rigging, or the earlier set of rigging, you have accepted a justification that the alternative is unthinkable. So you prefer to live with a rigged election than live with the alternative. How do you reconcile that with people in 2020 who are attempting to rig the election? They were saying at the time the alternative is punitively racist government, and we believe,
which wasn't true,
and we believe that rigging is a sufficient reason, or keeping that government out is a sufficient reason for rigging. How do you
The two
reconcile
I
that?
could say that the
Let-
two different eras, two different set of circumstances that do not resemble each other. But anyway,
But your answer.
One involved an external
Mhm.
force, the other one didn't.
Mhm.
The situation you're citing was entirely internal.
The 2020 was entirely internal.
Exactly, whereas before
Mhm.
it involved the intervention of the Soviet Union. It involved the intervention of Cuba. It involved us becoming clients of the Soviet Union and Cuba.
Mm.
And it involved the country becoming an enemy of the United States
Mm.
in the backyard of the United States. Very different situation to the Granger government rigging the election.
Okay, so 2020 cannot be similarly justified.
No, not in my mind.
Freddie.
Kit, I want to ask you if you shared the same trauma I shared a few years ago. When I was very critical of the PPP when they were in government, particularly Mr. Jackson in presidency, I would meet untold numbers of Indians that would say, man, how could you do this? You're an Indian. Freddie, you know the opposition is black. And that followed me around all over Guyana. When you broke with the UF and joined the PNC, an African head of government, an overtly black government, did Portuguese people meet you and say, what are you doing?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. They did.
You got that.
I got that hostility, yes.
Okay.
Not all, but from many.
Some friendships were lost.
Indeed.
Mm.
And they have since been regained.
They've since been redeemed. Okay.
You know, you live with that, Freddie. You may, if you're,
I know about
look,
it.
if you're going to get into politics, you have to be able to take the heat.
I like that. Hear this.
If you're in the kitchen, you must.
When
If
we
you're in the kitchen, you got to
when
take
we
the heat.
when
right?
we came here, Freddie mentioned that I am being attacked because I was with the AFC and I now support President Ali for a second term. And I've been
Talking
getting a
about
lot of
Freddie.
I've been getting a lot of heat and a lot of blowback and all of that. And I remember, as we're here with you, I remember you used to be on Channel 28, the Vera station, and you had a program called Commentary.
Correct.
And
Had a
it-
very big.
very, very large audience, I
Yes.
could tell you, throughout the country.
Yes.
And people used to tune in not for the news, but for the commentary. And a lot of things you said were caustic to the PPP. And not so long after you came off the program, and then a little off the spotlight, and then when you appeared back in the spotlight, you were
Supporting the PPP.
yeah, you were perceived to be supporting the PPP. Can you take us talk?
Well,
talk
you know,
about
you know that how that happened
Mhm.
is that my public relations services were engaged by Jack Deal.
Mhm. Okay.
That's my first relationship, if you want to call it that,
Mhm.
with the PPP. But let me say this:
Mhm.
I have never joined either party. I have never been a member of the PNC as a party, and I'm certainly not a member of the PPP.
Understood. But
And I've regarded my attachments as rather more professional than political, and I still feel that way.
okay. So you being engaged by the government is the reason you stopped the commentary. or you
No,
had
no,
already
no,
stopped
no.
the commentary?
The reason I stopped the commentary is because the owner of the station, Tony Vera,
Mhm.
began to interfere with what I could say.
Mm.
And when he did that, I resigned the commentary.
Oh, okay.
It
And
had nothing to do with politics.
Kit,
Okay.
you have been, even if you were not intricately at all times since 1970 involved in the corridors of power, you had access to policymakers, plus you would get analyses from your colleagues. Do you believe that Walter Rodney was planning the removal of Burnham? And I will say in the context of what Rupert Kupnarine has openly said, one to an interviewer, which is in a book called The Wild Coast, and in another book called Promise of a Revolution. We were stockpiling arms. And at one time in an interview, you say, we were stockpiling arms right up the room there. We were sitting at the Tate House in Comina Street, which is now named... it has
Murray's house?
No, Murray House is a private residence of David the Kings. The Tate House is now renamed, it's a hotel now.
I know.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you believe that the WPA, Walter Rodney, was planning a violent overthrow of the Burnham government?
Yes.
You have
There was sufficient evidence. The PNC Burnham knew this. He was well aware of the stockpiling. There was very little Burnham didn't know in his office.
So that became a zero-sum battle. That became a Maurice Bishop, Bernard Coe thing in Grenada. Either one had to go.
In a sense, well, remember this, that Rodney, when he died, he put a neutral description on it. When he died, had a bomb in his lap, which was a violent act in itself.
But isn't there a dispute about that he had a walkie-talkie, that they were trying to look at the range of the transmission?
He had a bomb in his lap, which could be externally set off. And it was.
But Rodney didn't know he was carrying a bomb.
He did know he was carrying a bomb, but he didn't. He was betrayed by the person who set the bomb off.
So Rodney was aware that it wasn't a technical transmitting device.
They were planning to blow a hole in the prison wall.
You believe that?
Yes, I don't believe it. I know it.
Oh, you know that?
Remember the position I had at the time. I was the minister in the government. I had access to much the same information that Burnham did. I was minister.
So you're saying that is not just the PNC perspective or PNC's public relations twist to Rodney being at that point next to the prison, that he was going to blow a hole in the prison? Wasn't it just a PR play?
No, it was evidential.
It was
Kit, do you believe? Let's look at some.
But he was betrayed.
And
by the man who fled to what's his name?
but was
Smith.
Do you think
Gregory Smith?
You said there are few things Burnham didn't know. Do you think Burnham knew of that plot? Your own opinion.
Yes, but Burnham did not. Burnham did not give directions to have Rodney killed.
So you think these were
So
just...
what went wrong?
So do you think these were just people who...
Others underneath Burnham made
okay.
that decision.
But Burnham must know they would have got Burnham into enormous global problems.
They operated signal in 8 minutes.
Okay.
That's something that you'll have to wait until my memoirs to get the full facts.
Oh my goodness, you heard that? Let us look at the camera and tell our viewers. The whole story about the Walter Rodney assassination, the different dimensions of it, will be in the memoir of Christopher Kit Nascimento. As we were on this explosive subject of WPA, and you just said you in the cabinet you knew. Look, David Hines was arrested at the airport for carrying a concealed weapon. Hamilton Green told me, Kit Hamilton Green told me in an interview in his home, that they knew Ohina Kouama had guns in his trunk. Okay? Was there a mole or one mole in the WPA? Elvin McDavid told me in his home, we knew everything what the WPA was doing. We had people there.
I told you that there was very little Burnham didn't know.
But that doesn't answer the question. Were there moles in the WPA?
There were sources of information that were available.
That still doesn't answer the question, Christopher Nascimento.
Well, what do you mean by a mole? I mean,
They had people inside the WPA leadership giving.
I couldn't answer that because I don't know.
But do you believe?
What I know is that there was little that the WPA were doing that Burnham didn't know about.
Christopher Nascimento, let me tell you.
I didn't always know what Burnham's sources of information were, but what I did know is that he knew what was going on.
Can I say this to Craig and you that never been said or written before, although it's contained in a book? I don't want to confuse the book on politics written by a man you know named Burroughs, named The Wild Coast. This book is
I know the book.
This book is called Wild Coast. It's a travel book.
I know of it.
Right. Rupert Rupert admitted in that Rodney was carrying a bomb. He said he was carrying a bomb.
Well, I did told you he was.
So, but did you read that part of the interview with the writer?
No, I didn't.
Right. So in that book, Rodney is being interviewed at Tate House. Tate House has now a famous hotel name.
I know Tate House.
Yeah, he said in Community Street. He said, yes, he was carrying a bomb. So
you're saying Rodney knew he had a bomb?
No, I'm saying that. Rupert Rupert said Rodney was carrying a bomb.
Of course, Rodney knew he was.
He is saying Rodney knew he was carrying a bomb.
Knew.
Yes.
I always thought that Rodney did not know he was carrying a bomb.
Well,
I always thought that
it was a transmitting
he
thing.
had a transmitter.
And he thought he wanted to see how the thing could go
And he was
against
testing
metal.
the range for probably some later action nearby the prison.
Why was he actually close to the prison when he was killed?
The metal, the one probably could walk against metal.
Yeah, I think somebody like told him, hey, you go, this is the range. All right. You move, go left, go right, and he ended up at the prison. I thought he was misled into going there. That was my reading of what was happening.
Absolutely not.
And I always thought
He said absolutely not.
Yeah, well, I heard that, but I'm just telling you, I always thought it was a public relations stunt by the then Burnham administration to say that Rodney was going to do that. But given your perspective, I
can tell you this.
Mm-hmm.
I would say this much. That immediately after Rodney was killed or died, because he was killed.
Yeah.
He was actually murdered.
Mm-hmm. Well, given his profile, we got to say assassinated.
By the man who had the transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately after that, Burnham called 3 people into his office. I was one. And he was furious.
Mm.
I personally witnessed that.
Mm.
Burnham was furious.
Mm.
But couldn't that have been a facade?
No, not with the 3 people who were in that office.
Who were the other 2 persons?
I'm not going to tell you that.
But are they alive? If they're not alive, it doesn't make any sense.
One is alive.
One is alive. Who's the other one that is dead?
I'm not going to tell you that.
That will be in your memoir. The person name.
No.
But you can't do history that. You can't do Guyana's historiography that. Rodney is killed. Burnham called 3 of his most trusted colleagues into his office. That has to be in the memoir.
No, it doesn't. What
But-
goes in the
but-
memoir is
but-
what
but
I
you-
decided, Freddie.
But you are satisfied that Burnham was extremely outraged
He was.
and that he was trying to make sense of.
Because it didn't
What-
make it made no sense.
Mhm.
Burnham was bound to get the blame, and he did.
Mm, mm, mm. But was he
To this
involved?
day, it's believed that.
But was he involved in cleaning up after? I understand now from your perspective that, hey, look, he didn't know of the planning and execution. But Burnham had to have known that a military plane is provided for this guy to fly to French Guyana.
Oh yes, all of that he knew.
Okay.
Of
So
course.
he helped with the cleaning up.
Of course.
Oh, okay.
But you were out of the loop by then. But what I don't understand, you were out of the loop by the time Jagan, I don't know if it's Jagan or Mrs. Jagan. I don't think it was Jack Deal as president, in which they asked the French government to extradite
Uh-huh.
Smith. But the French government says, yes, there's will you guarantee me there'll be no death penalty?
And
Why
that-
did they back? Why did Jagan or Mrs. Jagan
I'm
back
aware.
out of
I'm
that?
aware of that circumstances. I was not in any position of authority.
But why
correct.
did they say yes? We wouldn't sentence him, but send him back. Why did they refuse to give France that guarantee?
You'd have to ask that of someone in the PPP.
Oh, so you don't
Not me. No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, and the operator signaling our time is up. But what I as a young man, when that guarantee was not given, I'm saying this guy was alive there and then. Why not? You know,
Okay, look.
He was in. He was,
I was
he
suspicious of that.
He was in French territory, and the French didn't facilitate him.
No, but they were pellucid. We are going to send him back if you guarantee that you're not going to apply the death penalty, because France does not believe in a death penalty.
And yes, and do we know what the PPP decision was?
It is clear that that they didn't pursue it because the guy never came back until he died.
But I'm the wrong person to question.
Yeah,
we
obviously.
gotta go. Kid, thanks for being with us. We're gonna do this
pleasure.
again. After the interview, please let me into your library and we get a look at that draft copy.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah, you were looking at an interview with one of the Guyanese icons, 93 years of age, plus still going strong, who is one of the few Guyanese who can speak expansively on the contents of Guyana from 1964 onwards. None other than Christopher Kit Nascimento. We have conducted this interview in his yard, in his benab, and you can see the flourishing garden in the background, Century Palm Garden where he lives. Thanks for being with us. We will see you again in our next program. On behalf of Christopher Nascimento, Leonard Pegg,